The private room at the restaurant had been booked for 3 months. My mom's 60th birthday was supposed to be perfect. There were 23 family members, Italian marble tables, and fresh orchids at every place setting. My sister, Megan, had spent 40 minutes describing the planning process to anyone who would listen. I arrived right on time, wearing the gray dress my mother once said made me look like a mouse. My parents, Walter and Diane, barely looked up when I walked in. My dad was showing my brother-in-law, Peter, his new golf clubs. My mom was admiring Megan's new car key fob as if it were a Cartier bracelet. Leather seats, panoramic roof, everything, Megan announced for the 3rd time. Peter and I decided we deserved something nice. I took my assigned seat at the farthest end of the table, next to my cousin's 9-year-old son, who was completely focused on his tablet. The seating chart had been planned strategically, according to Megan. I was placed as far from the birthday girl as possible while still being in the same room. My Uncle Arthur arrived 20 minutes late, looking a little flustered with his tie crooked. He was my father's younger brother, an intellectual property lawyer from another city who visited maybe twice a year. We'd kept in touch, mostly through email, discussing specific questions I had about intellectual property for my work. Sorry, he said, kissing my mom's cheek before scanning the table. His face lit up when he saw me. Grace, there you are. He practically jogged to my end of the table, ignoring the empty seat next to my father that had been saved for him. Uncle Arthur, I said, standing up to hug him. How's life after that 80 million peso patent sale? He asked, his voice booming in the sudden pause in conversation. I was just telling my partners about your humidity-detecting coating technology. Brilliant work. The room didn't just get quiet. It fell into that specific kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Megan's mouth was hanging open mid-sentence, her story about the phone connection in her new car dying on her lips. My brother-in-law's wine glass was suspended halfway to his mouth. My father's hand froze over his water glass. My mother's face went through a remarkable journey: confusion, recognition, panic, and finally, a desperate attempt at a smile. "What patent?" she whispered, but somehow her voice reached every corner of the room. I sipped my wine calmly, letting the moment settle. Uncle Arthur, happily unaware of the bomb he had just dropped, continued enthusiastically. "Just the agricultural applications alone are a game changer. And the licensing contracts you structured. Grace, are you going to revolutionize crop management in drought-prone regions?" "You sold a patent," my father, Walter, said slowly, pronouncing each word with care. "For 80 million pesos, in April of last year," I said simply. "Agrotech Solutions. The deal closed on the 15th. "In April of last year," my mother repeated. She was squeezing her napkin so tightly her knuckles had turned white. That was almost a year ago." 11 months, I confirmed. Megan finally found her voice. "You're lying. You work in a library." "I'm a research chemist at Dendrita Solutions," I said. "I've been there for 6 years. The library job was during my PhD, which I finished in 2019. "But you told us," my mom began. "I never told you I worked in a library," I interrupted gently. "When I mentioned my research position at Dendrita, you said, 'That's nice, dear,' and immediately changed the subject to Megan's promotion to assistant manager at Walmart. I stopped correcting your assumption after the 3rd family dinner." Uncle Arthur was now looking back and forth between us, the situation finally dawning on him. "Wait, you mean they didn't know?" "Know what?" my dad demanded. "That our daughter has apparently been living a secret life." "Secret?" I put my glass down on the table. "I sent you both an invitation to my PhD graduation. I mailed you a copy of my dissertation. I wrote to you when I got the job at Dendrita. I called when my first patent was approved. You told me you were busy with Megan's housewarming party." "A PhD?" My mother's voice was now a tiny whisper. "I have a PhD in materials science and chemical engineering with honors," I said. I turned to Uncle Arthur. "Thank you for asking about the patent. The licensing revenue is already exceeding projections. We're looking at an additional 25 million pesos over the next 3 years from secondary applications. My cousin Denise, sitting in the middle of the table, started to laugh. Not a polite chuckle, but a real, full-throated laugh. "I'm sorry," she managed to say between breaths. "But Aunt Diane, you told me at Christmas dinner that Grace finally had a steady job shelving books. You said it with a straight face. I believed you." My mom looked at my dad in desperation. "You were mistaken," Uncle Arthur said, his lawyer's voice coming out. "Grace's patent has been featured in 3 industry journals. She was the keynote speaker at the International Polymer Congress last fall. I just assumed you were bursting with pride." The waiter appeared with the appetizers, creating a moment of false normalcy as he set down the plates. No one touched their food. Megan recovered first, trying to regain control. "Well, that's very nice, Grace, but money isn't everything. Peter and I are focusing on work-life balance. My promotion to senior assistant manager comes with real leadership responsibilities." "That sounds fulfilling," I said sincerely. "More fulfilling than selling 1 patent and living off of it," she added with a sharp smile. Uncle Arthur made a sound that might have been a choked laugh. "Grace isn't living off of it. She now leads the development team for a biodegradable alternative to plastic. The preliminary results are extraordinary. If it works at scale, we're talking about a potential environmental revolution." "Our firm," my father said, "my firm handles Grace's intellectual property portfolio," Uncle Arthur explained. "We've been working together since her 2nd year of grad school. She has 4 patents currently pending, 3 already approved and licensed, and 2 more in development. And the 80 million peso sale was, in fact, her smallest deal." I watched my mother's face carefully. She was doing the math. You could see it behind her eyes. "Your smallest," she managed to say. The humidity-detecting coating had limited applications, mostly agricultural, I explained. The earlier patent for the self-healing polymer compound was licensed for 130 million pesos to 3 different manufacturers, but that's paid out over a longer term. Megan's face had turned blotchy red. "You expect us to believe you've made over 200 million? "I haven't made it," I corrected. "It's licensed, and the total is closer to 310 million pesos if you include royalty structures and consulting fees. Though after taxes and legal fees, the take-home amount is less." The silence now was different, heavier. My brother-in-law, Peter, cleared his throat. "So when Megan told you last year that you should really think about getting a real job with benefits, you told me I was wasting my potential," I said, looking directly at Megan. "You said I was 31 with nothing to show for it. You suggested I apply for a job at the Walmart where you work because you could put in a good word for me." "I was just trying to help," Megan said weakly. "You wanted to feel superior," Denise chimed in. "We all saw you do it. At every family gathering, you'd find a way to mention Grace's struggles while talking about your management training." My father put his fork down with a sharp click. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I did," I replied. "Over and over, for years. You weren't interested in listening." "That's not fair," my mom said. "We've always supported you." Uncle Arthur snorted. "Diane, with all due respect, I have been at family dinners where you introduce Grace as our other daughter, while spending 20 minutes boasting about Megan's retail career. At Christmas 2 years ago, you didn't even mention Grace in your toast." My mother's protest died in her throat. "When Grace called me about the agrotech deal, she was crying," Uncle Arthur continued, his voice softer now. "Not from happiness. She was crying because she had just tried to tell you both about the preliminary offer, and you put her on speakerphone while you were watching Megan's kids' soccer game. You said, 'That's nice, dear,' and hung up without asking a single question. I remembered that call. I was in my apartment staring at the offer letter, wanting to share the moment with my parents. The dial tone after they hung up had felt like a physical blow. 'We didn't know it was important,' my dad said. 'An 80 million peso offer wasn't important enough to get your full attention?' Uncle Arthur asked. Megan pushed her chair back. 'This is Mom's birthday dinner. Can we not do this right now?' "You're right," I said, standing up. I reached into my purse, pulled out an envelope, and placed it in front of my mother. "Happy birthday, Mom." She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a check for 500,000 pesos. "What is this?" she whispered. "A gift," I said. "I thought about what you might need. Dad mentioned last year that he wanted to remodel the kitchen. This should cover it." "We can't accept this," my dad said, but his eyes were glued to the check. "Yes, you can," I said. "It's a gift, no strings attached. You're still my parents, after all." My mom started to cry. Real tears, not the delicate ones she used for sympathy at church events. "Grace, I am so sorry. I never meant to make you feel invisible." "I know you didn't mean to," I completed softly, "but you did." "We can fix this," my dad said urgently. "We'll do better. We'll listen." I sat back down, and Uncle Arthur gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze. "I would like that," I said, "but it will require real change, not just promises at a birthday dinner." Denise raised her glass. "To Grace, the most successful person at this table, and the one who has been treated the worst." "Denise," my mom protested. "Am I wrong?" Denise challenged. "Does anyone want to argue that Grace hasn't been ignored and belittled at every family gathering for the last decade?" No one spoke. The waiter returned, asking if everything was all right with the appetizers. The question hung in the air with unintended irony. "Everything is fine," I said. "For my main course, may I please have the pappardelle bolognese?" The others slowly began to order. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Uncle Arthur stayed by my side, occasionally adding details about my work that my parents absorbed with visible amazement. Megan barely spoke, pushing food around her plate. Peter looked back and forth between his wife and me as if watching a tennis match. During the main course, my father asked, "What are you working on now?" It was the first time he had asked about my work in over 5 years. I told him about the biodegradable plastic project, the team I was leading, and the potential environmental impact. He listened, truly listened, asking follow-up questions that showed he was processing the information. My mother kept looking at the check, then at me, then back at the check. When dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation with sparklers, Megan made one last attempt. "Well, Mom, what do you think of your party?" "I think," my mom said slowly, "that I have been a terrible mother to one of my daughters." Megan flinched. "To both of them," my mom corrected. "Grace, I failed you by not seeing you. Megan, I failed you by letting you build your identity on being better than your sister, when your sister was succeeding beyond anything I could comprehend." It wasn't a full apology, not a perfect movie-style reconciliation, but it was honest. After dinner, as people were leaving, my dad pulled me aside. "About the kitchen remodel, could we, hire you as a consultant? I want to pick materials you would recommend. I want to understand what you do." "I design polymers, Dad, not kitchens." "I know," he said, "but you understand materials, properties, durability. I just thought," he trailed off, looking older than I remembered, "I thought maybe you could teach me a little about what you do." It was a start. Uncle Arthur drove me home. In the car, he said, "You handled that with impressive grace." Did I have a choice? "You had several choices," he said. "You chose the kind one." 3 weeks later, I received an email from my mother. There was no subject line, just the words. "I had your diploma framed. It's hanging in the living room. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you received it." A small thing, but small things add up. My father called the following Tuesday to ask about carbon fiber composites for a patio project he was planning. The project was obviously a made-up excuse to talk. I explained the material's properties anyway. We talked for 47 minutes. Megan sent a text 2 months later. "I'm sorry I felt threatened by your success. I'm working on it." I replied, "I'm sorry I let you believe we were competing." The kitchen remodel began in May. My parents consulted me on every material choice, asking questions that showed they were genuinely trying to understand my work. My mom even started attending lectures at the local public university on environmental science. forwarding me articles she thought I would find interesting. At Megan's birthday dinner in July, my mom introduced me as Dr. Grace Richardson, our daughter, the research chemist. She said it with a pride that sounded genuine. Then she spent just as much time talking about Megan's promotion to department manager. Balance. Not perfect, but progress. Uncle Arthur and I had lunch the week after Megan's party. "So how does it feel?" he asked. "Strange," I admitted. "I spent so long being invisible that being seen feels almost uncomfortable." "You'll adjust," he said. "You're brilliant at adapting." The biodegradable plastic project received preliminary approval for testing in September. My team celebrated with champagne in the lab. I took a picture and sent it to the family group chat. My mom responded within minutes, asking questions about the science. Megan sent a congratulatory animation. My dad called that night to ask me to explain the project from the very beginning. I did. He listened to the entire 40-minute explanation without changing the subject once. In November, I received an invitation to speak at an environmental summit. The speaking fee was 700,000 pesos. I accepted, then forwarded the invitation to my parents with a note. "If you're interested in attending, I'd like to buy your tickets." They both came. They sat in the front row for my keynote address. My mom cried during the standing ovation. At the airport on the way home, my dad said, "I missed so much of your life." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "Can I be in the rest of it?" he asked. I thought about the years of being overlooked, the slights, the casual cruelty of being forgotten in a room you occupy. I thought about the check I gave my mom, which they never cashed. Instead, they had it framed next to my diploma with a small plaque that read, "Given with more grace than we deserved." I thought about the choice between holding on to the pain and making room for change. "Yes," I said, "you can be in the rest of it." It wasn't perfect. Megan and I still had awkward moments. My parents sometimes slipped into old patterns, catching themselves mid-sentence and apologizing. But they were trying, really trying. At Christmas, Uncle Arthur raised his glass to Grace, who taught us all that the quietest person in the room might just be the most accomplished. And to second chances, my mom added quietly. I raised my glass to family, the complicated, messy, imperfect, and working to be better kind. The patents kept coming, the projects kept succeeding, but the real victory was smaller, harder to quantify. It was in the phone calls where my dad asked about my day, in the articles my mom sent, in Megan's texts that no longer sounded competitive. I had spent years being invisible. Now I was seen. Not for the money or the patents or the accolades, but for the person I had always been, finally acknowledged by the people who should have seen me all along. The revenge, if you could call it that, wasn't in the revelation at my mom's birthday dinner. It was in the grace I showed afterward, in refusing to let their failures define me, in building a life so full and meaningful that their neglect became their loss, not mine. And in the end, in giving them the chance to realize what they had almost lost forever,